The ancient pine forests of the Shadowmoon Territory had always been Lyra's sanctuary, but tonight they felt like a trap. 20 years as Alpha King had taught her to trust her instincts, and every fiber of her being screamed danger as golden eyes watched her from the treeline. The wolf stepped forward, massive, silver-coated, with a distinctive scar along his jaw that made her blood run cold. She knew that mark. She had been there when claws created it, when she'd found a dying pup abandoned by rival packs and nursed him back to health against all protocol. But this wasn't the grateful youngling she'd saved. This was a fully grown male whose presence radiated power that rivaled her own, something that should have been impossible. Only alphas possessed such strength, and she would have sensed another alpha years ago. Her pack waited behind her, ready to defend their territory, but Lyra raised a hand to stop them. The wolf's eyes held recognition, gratitude, and something else that made her heart race with equal parts fear and anticipation. What had her act of mercy 20 years ago unleashed upon her kingdom? The silver wolf's muscles coiled beneath his gleaming coat as he lowered himself into a submissive posture, but the gesture felt strangely hollow. His power hummed through the air like electricity before a storm, making the hair on Lyra's arms stand on end. Behind her she heard Marcus, her beta, emit a low growl of warning. "Alpha King," Marcus whispered, his voice tight with concern. "That wolf, there's something unnatural about his presence." Lyra's mind raced back to that night 2 decades ago. She'd been barely 25 then, newly crowned after her father's death, desperate to prove herself worthy of leading the most powerful pack in the Northern Territories. The smart choice would have been to let the dying pup pass peacefully. He'd belonged to the Bloodfang pack, their enemies. Saving him violated every law her ancestors had written in blood. Yet something about the small, broken creature had called to her. Perhaps it was the defiant spark in his golden eyes, even as death crept closer. Or maybe it was the way he'd tried to protect an even smaller female pup who'd already succumbed to her injuries. Whatever the reason, Lyra had made a choice that haunted her advisors for months afterward. She'd brought him home. For 3 weeks, she'd tended to his wounds personally, feeding him by hand, sitting vigil through fever dreams that left him whimpering in languages she didn't recognize. When he'd finally healed enough to walk, she'd expected him to return to whatever remained of his scattered pack. Instead, he'd vanished in the night without a word. Now, staring into those same golden eyes set in a face that spoke of strength and secrets, Lyra felt the weight of that old decision settling on her shoulders like a mantle of lead. The wolf, she couldn't think of him by any other name, though surely he had one now, lifted his massive head and took another step closer. When he was close enough that she could see the silver threading through his dark fur, close enough that his wild scent filled her nostrils, he began to shift. The transformation was unlike anything she'd ever witnessed. Where most wolves shifted with painful, bone-cracking sounds, his change flowed like water, elegant and eerily silent. Power rippled through the air with such intensity that several of her pack members stepped back involuntarily. When the light faded, a man stood before her. He was tall, easily matching her own impressive height, with the same golden eyes that had haunted her memories. His hair fell in silver-streaked waves to his shoulders, and the scar she remembered from his wolf form traced a thin line along his strong jaw. But it was his presence that stole her breath, an aura of command that spoke of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "My queen," he said, and his voice was deeper than mountain thunder, rich with an accent she couldn't place. When he inclined his head, it was with the practiced grace of nobility, not the awkward deference of a rescued pup. "I told you I would return when I was worthy of the gift you gave me." Marcus shifted restlessly behind her. "Alpha King, he could be anyone. The pup you saved—" At a crescent-shaped birthmark on his left shoulder, Lyra interrupted, her gaze never leaving the stranger's face, just above his heart. Without hesitation, the man pulled aside the leather vest he wore, revealing the distinctive mark branded into his skin like a silver tattoo. "Hello, Lyra," he said softly, and something in the way he spoke her name sent warmth spiraling through her chest. "I'm afraid my return brings complications you could never have anticipated." The wind shifted, carrying with it a scent that made Lyra's blood freeze in her veins. Not just his scent, she caught traces of foreign magic, of power that belonged to the old bloodlines, the ones that were supposed to be extinct. "What are you?" she whispered. His smile was beautiful and terrible. "I'm exactly what you made me, my queen. The question is, are you prepared for the consequences?" The morning sun cast long shadows through the ancient oaks as Lyra made her way back to the heart of her territory. The encounter with the mysterious wolf still played through her mind, each detail sharp and unsettling. His scent lingered in her nostrils, wild pine and something darker, something that spoke of power barely contained. She shifted back to human form as she approached the stone fortress that had served as her seat of power for over 2 centuries. The massive structure rose from the hillside like a natural extension of the mountain itself, its weathered walls having witnessed the rise and fall of countless challenges to her rule. Today, those walls felt less like protection and more like a prison of responsibility. "My queen." Marcus, her beta and oldest friend, intercepted her at the main entrance. His weathered face bore the concerned expression she'd grown accustomed to seeing whenever she disappeared on one of her solitary runs. "The council has been waiting." Lyra suppressed a growl. She'd forgotten about the monthly territorial review where pack leaders from across her domain would present their reports and air their grievances. It was a necessary evil of leadership, but today the thought of sitting through hours of political maneuvering made her wolf pace restlessly beneath her skin. "How long?" she asked, running her fingers through her dark hair to remove bits of forest debris. "An hour. They're growing restless." Marcus fell into step beside her as they entered the great hall. "There's been talk. There's always talk." "Is different, Lyra." His use of her given name, rather than her title, made her pause. "Some of the younger alphas are questioning your isolation. They say you've become too distant, too removed from pack concerns." The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd isolated herself to protect them all, to keep the darker aspects of her power in check. But isolation bred suspicion, and suspicion could fracture the delicate balance she'd worked so hard to maintain. The council chamber buzzed with conversation as she entered, but silence fell like a blade the moment her presence was felt. 12 alphas rose from their seats around the circular table, each representing a different pack within her territory. Their faces showed varying degrees of respect, wariness, and barely concealed ambition. "My apologies for the delay," Lyra said, taking her place at the head of the table. "Please, continue your reports." For the next 2 hours, she listened to complaints about border disputes, requests for hunting ground expansions, and the ever-present concerns about rogue wolves entering their territory. She offered judgments with the wisdom of centuries, but part of her mind remained fixed on steel-grey eyes and the promise of secrets yet to be revealed. "There is one final matter," spoke Alpha Daemon from the eastern packs. His voice carried the confidence of someone who believed himself her equal, a dangerous delusion she'd tolerated for too long. "There have been sightings of an unknown wolf in the northern forests, a powerful one by all accounts." Lyra kept her expression neutral, though her pulse quickened. "Unknown wolves are not uncommon. We deal with rogues regularly. This one is different." Damon's pale eyes fixed on hers with barely concealed challenge. "My scouts report he moves with authority, shows no fear of our borders. Some believe he may be building support, gathering followers." "Are you suggesting I cannot handle a single rogue wolf, Alpha Daemon?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as Lyra's power pressed against the edges of her control. To his credit, Daemon didn't flinch, though several other alphas shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "I'm suggesting that perhaps a more collaborative approach might be warranted. A joint hunting party led by the council." "No." The word cut through the air like a whip crack. "I will handle this personally." "My queen," Marcus interjected carefully. "Perhaps Alpha Daemon has a point. If this wolf poses a significant threat, I said I will handle it. Lyra rose from her seat, her authority filling the room like a living thing. This meeting is concluded. As the alphas filed out, their murmured conversations creating a susurrus of discontent, Marcus remained behind. His expression held the weight of unspoken concerns. "You know who it is," he said quietly. Lyra turned to face the great windows overlooking her territory, watching the afternoon shadows lengthen across the forest canopy. Somewhere out there, he waited. The pup she'd saved, now grown into something that could either strengthen or shatter everything she'd built. "I have suspicions," she admitted. "Suspicions dangerous enough to keep from your oldest friend." She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of secrets and the burden of choices made long ago. "Some dangers are best faced alone, Marcus, and some are too great for even an alpha king to handle without support." His hand touched her shoulder briefly before he withdrew. "Be careful, Lyra. Whatever history you share with this wolf, the Council won't remain patient forever. They smell weakness, and they're beginning to circle." As his footsteps faded, Lyra remained at the window, watching the forest and wondering if somewhere in those depths, steel-grey eyes were watching her in return. The morning sun cast long shadows through the ancient oaks as Lyra made her way to the eastern border. Sleep had eluded her, haunted by golden eyes and the phantom scent of mountain pine that seemed to linger in her quarters despite the wolf's absence. She'd dismissed her guards, needing solitude to process what she'd witnessed in her dungeons. The mysterious wolf had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only bent iron bars and questions that gnawed at her like hunger. In her centuries as Alpha King, she'd encountered many powerful wolves, but none who could simply dissolve silver chains with their bare hands while appearing utterly unaffected by the moon's pull. Her beta, Marcus, intercepted her at the forest's edge. His weathered face bore the familiar crease of concern that appeared whenever he sensed her distress. They'd known each other since childhood, and he could read her moods better than most. "The patrols found no trace of him," Marcus reported, falling into step beside her. "It's as if he simply disappeared into the morning mist." Lyra nodded, her fingers absently tracing the silver pendant at her throat, a habit that surfaced when her thoughts grew troubled. "Double the border guards. I want to know the moment any unfamiliar wolf sets foot in our territory." "Already done." Marcus hesitated, then added, "The pack elders are asking questions. Word spreads quickly when a prisoner escapes from the castle dungeons." She could imagine the whispered conversations already beginning in the great hall. Her authority had never been seriously challenged, but she ruled through strength and certainty. Any sign of weakness would be seized upon by those who still believed a female couldn't truly lead. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached the meadow where she'd first encountered the golden-eyed stranger. The grass still bore the impression of their brief struggle, and she found herself studying the ground for any clue she might have missed. "Tell me about the old stories," she said suddenly, "the ones about wolves who could change at will, unbound by lunar cycles." Marcus's eyebrows rose. "Ancient legends speak of the Shadowborn, wolves blessed by the moon goddess herself with extraordinary gifts. But those are just stories, Lyra. Children's tales to explain things our ancestors couldn't understand." "Are they?" She crouched down, running her fingers through the disturbed earth. "What if some legends carry more truth than we realize?" Before Marcus could respond, a familiar voice cut through the morning air. "My lady." Captain Thorne approached with his usual brisk efficiency, though something in his expression made Lyra's instincts sharpen. "We've received word from the Northern Territories. Lord Aldrich requests an audience." The name sent a chill down Lyra's spine. Aldrich ruled the Northern Mountain Territories with ruthless ambition, and his requests for audiences typically preceded some form of political maneuvering. She'd been expecting him to make a move ever since the recent skirmishes along the borderlands. "When?" she asked, rising to her full height. "He's already on his way. should arrive before sunset with a full retinue. Lyra exchanged glances with Marcus. Unannounced visits were considered deeply discourteous among Alpha leaders, unless the visitor held significant leverage or felt confident enough to ignore protocol. "Prepare the formal reception hall," she instructed Thorn. "Full ceremonial guard. I want him to remember exactly whose territory he's entering." As the captain departed, Marcus moved closer, lowering his voice. "You think this is connected to our mysterious visitor?" The thought had already occurred to her. The timing seemed too convenient. A powerful unknown wolf appearing in her territory one day, followed by an unexpected visit from her most ambitious rival the next. Either the fates had a cruel sense of humor, or forces were moving against her that she didn't yet understand. "I think we're about to find out," she murmured, her mind already working through the implications. If Aldrich had somehow orchestrated the stranger's infiltration, it suggested a level of planning and resource that made him far more dangerous than she'd previously estimated. They began the walk back toward the castle, but Lyra found herself glancing over her shoulder at the meadow. Something about this place continued to call to her, as if the very ground held secrets waiting to be unearthed. "There's something else," Marcus said carefully. "The kitchen staff mentioned that food went missing from the pantries last night. Bread, dried meat, travel provisions. A escaped prisoner would need supplies, but somehow Lyra doubted her mysterious visitor had stooped to common thievery. He'd demonstrated abilities that suggested resources beyond what most wolves possessed, which raised the question, who was he really, and what had brought him specifically to her territory? The castle walls rose before them, stone battlements that had protected her people for generations. But as Lyra gazed up at her ancestral home, she couldn't shake the feeling that the true battle was only beginning. The council chamber fell silent as Lyra pushed through the heavy oak doors, her silver hair still disheveled from the morning's encounter. The 5-pack elders sat around the ancient stone table, their weathered faces turning toward her with expressions ranging from concern to barely concealed disapproval. "You're late," Elder Thorn growled, his scarred hands folded before him. "We've been waiting an hour." Lyra took her place at the head of the table, forcing her racing heart to steady. The scent of the mysterious wolf still clung to her clothes, a constant reminder of how thoroughly her world had shifted in the span of a single morning. "Forgive me. There was an incident on the eastern border that required my attention." "What kind of incident?" Elder Mira leaned forward, her keen eyes studying Lyra's face. As the pack's former lead tracker, she'd always been too perceptive for comfort. "A lone wolf crossed into our territory. I handled it personally." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. Handled it. If only it were that simple. Elder Blackwood, the youngest of the council at 63, frowned. "A rogue? These incursions have been increasing. Perhaps it's time we reinforced our border patrols." "No." The word came out sharper than Lyra intended. She caught herself, modulating her tone. "That won't be necessary. The situation is resolved." Thorn's eyes narrowed. "You speak with unusual certainty for someone who encountered an unknown threat. Are you sure this wolf won't return?" The memory of those golden eyes burned in her mind, the way recognition had flickered between them like lightning before the storm. The careful way he'd moved, powerful muscles rippling beneath midnight fur that reminded her of... "I'm certain," she lied smoothly. Elder Cassius cleared his throat, shuffling through a stack of parchments. "Very well. Let's proceed with pack business. The autumn tribute from the northern settlements has arrived, but the amounts are lower than expected. There's also the matter of the territorial dispute with the Shadowmoon pack." Lyra nodded and made appropriate responses as the meeting progressed, but her mind kept wandering to the forest, to the way the stranger had looked at her, not with the deference she was accustomed to, but with something deeper, something that spoke of shared history and unfinished business. 47 years. She'd ruled the Silverwood Pack for 47 years, building it from a scattered group of refugees into the most powerful pack in the Northern Territories. She'd made difficult decisions, sacrificed personal desires for the greater good, and never once wavered in her dedication to her people's safety and prosperity. So why did 10 minutes with a mysterious wolf make her question everything? The reports from our scouts suggest the Shadowmere pack is moving closer to our southern border, Elder Mira was saying. Their alpha, Damon Blackthorn, has been making aggressive moves since taking power last spring. Lyra's attention snapped back to the present. Damon Blackthorn, you know him? Thorn asked. She shook her head slowly. The name is familiar, but I can't place it. Another lie. She remembered Damon well, a brutal wolf who'd challenged her authority 3 years ago and been thoroughly defeated. If he'd taken control of Shadowmere, it meant trouble. He's been recruiting rogues and displaced wolves, Blackwood added grimly. Building an army of sorts. Our spies report he's particularly interested in acquiring wolves with unusual abilities. The words sent a chill down Lyra's spine. Unusual abilities. Like the power she'd sensed radiating from the stranger this morning. The raw strength that had made her wolf whimper in recognition and submission. We should increase our intelligence gathering, she said carefully. I want to know everything about Damon's movements and recruitment efforts. Already underway, Mira assured her. But Lyra, there's something else. Something that might be connected. She hesitated, glancing at the other elders. There have been rumors, stories of a wolf who can't be killed. They call him the ghost of the northern wastes. Lyra's blood turned to ice. What kind of stories? Traders speak of a massive black wolf who appears and disappears like mist. Some claim to have seen him torn apart by enemies, only to witness him walking away unharmed days later. Mira's voice dropped to almost a whisper. They say he's searching for something, or someone. The chamber spun around Lyra as memories crashed over her in waves. A small, broken pup bleeding out in her arms. The desperate decision to use forbidden magic. Consequences be damned. The way his wounds had sealed themselves unnaturally fast, and the strange shimmer in his eyes when he'd looked at her before disappearing into the night. She'd saved him, but at what cost? And what had he become in the decades since? Alpha? Thorn's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you all right? Lyra straightened, forcing steel into her spine. Whatever was coming, whatever the stranger's return meant for her pack, she would face it as she always had, with strength, cunning, and absolute resolve. I'm fine, she said, meeting each elder's gaze in turn. Continue monitoring the situation. Report any unusual activity immediately. But as the meeting resumed around her, one thought echoed relentlessly through her mind. The ghost had come home. The ancient stone chamber beneath the palace had witnessed countless secrets over the centuries, but none quite like this. Lyra descended the spiral steps, her footsteps echoing off walls carved with protective runes that pulsed faintly in the torchlight. Behind her, Kyle's presence felt different now. Heavier, charged with unspoken truths that made the air between them crackle. You've been here before, Kyle said, his voice carrying an odd certainty as they reached the circular chamber at the bottom. Lyra paused, her hand still on the cold stone banister. This is the heart of the palace. Few are permitted entry. She turned to study his face in the flickering light. How could you possibly know that? Instead of answering, Kyle moved toward the center of the room where an ornate pedestal held a sphere of pure moonstone. The artifact hummed with ancient magic, its surface swirling with silver mists that seemed to respond to his approach. Because I can smell my own blood on these stones. The words hit Lyra like a physical blow. She watched, transfixed, as Kyle placed his palm against the moonstone. Immediately the chamber filled with blinding white light, and when it faded, the sphere showed not mist but memories, clear as crystal, sharp as broken glass. A younger Lyra knelt beside a dying wolf in this very chamber, her hands glowing with healing magic as she poured her life force into the broken creature. But this wasn't the memory as she remembered it. This was from the wolf's perspective, and she could see herself through his eyes, desperate, powerful, beautiful in her determination to save him. You gave me more than healing that night, Kyle whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "You bound your magic to mine, made me something new." Lyra's breath caught. In the memory she watched herself speak words she'd forgotten, words in the old tongue that created bonds deeper than pack loyalty, stronger than blood. She'd been so young, so reckless in her desire to save him, that she'd performed magic even she didn't fully understand. "The joining of souls," she breathed, recognizing the ancient ritual. "But that's impossible. I would have felt it, would have known." "Sealed the bond after," Kyle said, gesturing to the swirling images in the sphere. "You were afraid of what you'd done, afraid your pack would see it as weakness." The memory shifted, showing her younger self performing another ritual, this one designed to lock away the connection she'd forged. But magic, once created, never truly disappeared. It merely waited. "The seal broke when I shifted in your territory," Kyle continued, "when our wolves recognized each other again." Lyra stumbled backward, her mind reeling. A soul bond was the most intimate magic two wolves could share, creating a connection that transcended pack loyalty, family ties, even death itself. It was why she'd felt such immediate recognition, such inexplicable trust, why her wolf had been so eager to accept him despite every rational instinct screaming danger. "You could have told me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And what would you have done? Honored a bond you made in ignorance, accepted a mate you never chose." Kyle's eyes burned with pain and longing. "You're the Alpha King, Lyra. You have a kingdom to protect, a legacy to maintain. I'm nothing but a complication you never wanted." The accusation stung because part of it held truth. Her position demanded careful alliances, strategic partnerships. A soul bond with a mysterious wolf of unknown lineage was political suicide. But as she looked at Kyle now, seeing the vulnerability he tried so hard to hide, Lyra felt something inside her chest crack open. "You think I care more about politics than—" She stopped, unable to finish the sentence, unable to admit what was growing between them despite the impossible circumstances. "Your counsel is already suspicious," Kyle said quietly. "Marcus questions my every breath. If they knew about the bond, about what I really am—" "What you really are?" Lyra stepped closer, drawn despite her fear. "You keep speaking in riddles, Kale. If we're bound as you say, then I deserve the truth. All of it." For a long moment he said nothing, his internal struggle playing out across his features. Finally, he reached for the clasp of his shirt, pulling it over his head to reveal the tattoos covering his torso. But in the moonstone's magical light, Lyra could see they weren't tattoos at all. They were scars, ritual markings that told a story of power and pain. "I'm not just any wolf, Lyra. I'm the last of the Shadowbane pack." His voice was steady now, resigned. "The pack your father destroyed 30 years ago in the War of 3 Moons." The chamber seemed to tilt around her. The Shadowbane pack, rebels who'd nearly brought down the kingdom, who wielded magic so dark it had taken 3 allied packs to stop them. Her father had spoken of that war only once, calling it the darkest chapter of his reign. "That's impossible," she whispered. "There were no survivors." Kyle's smile held no warmth. There was one. The morning mist clung to the forest floor as Lyra made her way through the ancient pines, her silver fur catching the filtered sunlight. Sleep had eluded her after Kyle's revelation, his words echoing through her mind like a haunting melody. The curse, the prophecy, the weight of destiny pressing down upon her shoulders with crushing force. She shifted into human form as she reached the sacred grove, a place where only the Alpha bloodline was permitted to tread. The crystalline pool at its center reflected the canopy above, its waters holding secrets older than memory itself. This was where she came when the burden of leadership threatened to consume her, where the voices of her ancestors whispered guidance through the wind. "Show me," she whispered to the pool, kneeling at its edge. "Show me what I need to see." The water shimmered, and images began to dance across its surface. She saw herself as a young alpha, barely grown into her power, stumbling upon a broken pup in the snow. But now she witnessed what she had missed before, the strange markings that had covered his small form, markings that pulsed with an otherworldly light before fading as her healing touch reached him. The vision shifted, revealing Kyle as he was now, but his true nature laid bare. Shadows writhed beneath his skin like living things, and his eyes burned with silver fire. Power radiated from him in waves, ancient and terrible and beautiful. This was no ordinary werewolf. This was something far more dangerous. "You see it now." The voice belonged to her grandmother, though the old alpha had been dead for 20 years. Her translucent form materialized beside the pool, ethereal and shimmering. "The child you saved carries the blood of the first wolves, the ones who walked between worlds." The shadow walkers, Lyra breathed, recognition dawning. "But they're just legends." "All legends spring from truth, granddaughter. He is the last of his kind, and his power grows stronger each day. Soon he will face a choice: embrace his heritage and risk losing his humanity, or suppress it and watch those he loves suffer." Lyra's heart clenched. The prophecy speaks of destruction. Prophecies are not immutable fate, but warnings of what may come to pass. The choice is still his to make, and yours as well. Her grandmother's form began to fade. "But beware, others know what he is. They come for him even now." The vision dissolved, leaving Lyra alone with her racing thoughts. She had to find Kyle, had to warn him, but as she rose to leave, a familiar scent reached her nostrils, iron and leather, the smell of the hunters. Marcus emerged from the treeline, his scarred face grim. Behind him came 3 others, all bearing the silver weapons and grim expressions of those who hunted supernatural creatures for coin and glory. Her territory meant nothing to them. They followed their prey wherever it led. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, his tone mocking, "how convenient to find you here. It saves us the trouble of hunting you down after we collect our prize." "There are no prizes to be claimed here, hunter. Leave my territory now, and I might let you keep your lives." Marcus laughed, a harsh sound that sent birds fleeing from nearby branches. "Bold words, but we both know you can't take all 4 of us, especially not when we know about your pet shadow walker." Lyra's blood turned to ice. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play innocent. We've been tracking him for weeks, the last of the shadow walkers, and he's been hiding right under your pretty nose." Marcus drew his silver blade, its edge gleaming with deadly purpose. "The Council of Mages is offering quite a sum for him, alive preferably, but they'll settle for his heart if necessary. You won't touch him." The words came out as a growl, her wolf fighting to surface. "Try to stop us." The attack came swift and coordinated, years of hunting supernatural creatures evident in their movements. Lyra shifted mid-leap, her massive silver wolf form colliding with the nearest hunter and sending him crashing into a tree. His neck snapped with a sickening crack. Silver bit into her flank as Marcus's blade found its mark, the blessed metal burning like acid. She spun and caught his wrist between powerful jaws, crushing bone and sending the weapon flying. His scream echoed through the grove. The remaining 2 hunters flanked her, moving with practiced efficiency. One carried a net woven with silver wire, while the other held a crossbow loaded with silver-tipped bolts. She was fast, but silver made her sluggish, her supernatural healing unable to cope with the blessed metal. A bolt grazed her shoulder, and she stumbled. The net flew through the air toward her, and she knew she wouldn't be able to dodge in time. Then shadows exploded from the forest, and Kyle materialized between her and the hunters like a creature born from nightmare itself. His eyes blazed with silver fire, and darkness poured from his skin like smoke. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. The transformation had begun. The ancient oak's roots seemed to pulse beneath Lyra's feet as she stared at Kyle, her mind reeling from his revelation. The weight of destiny pressed down upon them both, heavy as storm clouds gathering on the horizon. She had saved a pup decades ago, never imagining that simple act of mercy would return to shake the very foundations of her reign. "Show me," she commanded, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying all the authority of an alpha king. Kyle's silver eyes flickered with uncertainty. "Lyra, if I reveal this here, There's no going back. The pack bond will sense it. Every wolf within miles will feel the shift in power. I said, show me. Her tone brooked no argument, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. With a slow exhale that seemed to carry the weight of years, Kyle closed his eyes. The transformation that followed was unlike anything Lyra had ever witnessed. Where typical shifts were fluid and graceful, Kyle's change crackled with raw energy that made the air itself hum with electricity. His human form dissolved, not into the sleek grey wolf she'd encountered in her territory, but into something far more magnificent and terrifying. The creature that stood before her was massive, easily matching her own alpha form in size, but its coat shimmered with an otherworldly quality, silver-white like moonlight on fresh snow, with veins of pure starlight running through the fur. Most shocking of all were his eyes, no longer silver but gleaming gold, the unmistakable mark of royal bloodline. Lyra's legs nearly gave out beneath her. "You're Fenwick's son." The great wolf inclined his head once before shifting back to human form, the supernatural glow fading but not entirely disappearing. Traces of that celestial light still flickered beneath his skin like captured lightning. "The last heir of the Northern Kingdom," Kyle confirmed, running a hand through his dark hair. "The kingdom your father destroyed to unite the territories under one crown." The accusation hung between them like a blade. Lyra felt the familiar surge of defensive anger, but beneath it lurked something far more complex, guilt she'd carried for decades without fully understanding its source. "My father did what was necessary to end the war," she said, but the words tasted hollow on her tongue. The Northern Kingdom was falling apart. Fenwick's rule was what? Kyle stepped closer, and she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, smell the wild scent that had haunted her dreams. Weak, ineffective, or simply different from what your father believed kingship should be. Lyra's claws extended involuntarily as her wolf stirred in response to the challenge. "You don't know what you're talking about. I was there. I saw the aftermath of those battles, the suffering of wolves caught between warring factions. And I was there when your father's forces burned our capital." Kyle shot back, his own power flaring to life around him like a silver aura. "When they hunted down every member of the royal bloodline, when they left a 10-year-old prince for dead in the ruins of his ancestral home." The image hit Lyra like a physical blow. She remembered now, the small wolf she'd found in the burned-out remains of the northern palace, broken and bleeding, eyes dull with trauma. Her father had ordered the territory swept for survivors, but she'd deliberately failed to report the injured pup, instead carrying him to the border and setting him free. "You were so small," she whispered, the memory flooding back with crystal clarity, half dead, covered in ash and blood. I hoped you'd find a pack to take you in, somewhere far from the war." "I did, eventually." Kyle's expression softened slightly, "but not before I spent years as a rogue, learning to survive, growing strong enough to reclaim what was stolen from me. And now you've come back for revenge." It wasn't a question. Lyra straightened, calling upon every ounce of alpha authority she possessed. "You've infiltrated my pack, gained my trust, all to destroy me from within." To her surprise, Kyle laughed, a sound bitter and sharp as winter wind. "If I wanted simple revenge, Lyra, you'd already be dead. I've had a dozen opportunities since arriving here. I could have poisoned you, challenged you publicly, or simply waited for you to sleep and ended it quietly. Then what do you want?" The question hung in the air between them, charged with possibilities neither dared voice. Kyle took another step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his golden eyes, could feel his breath against her skin. "The same thing you want," he said quietly. "An end to the loneliness. A pack that doesn't fear their leader's strength. A future built on more than the ashes of the past." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. "You're asking me to share my throne. I'm asking you to unite our bloodlines and heal the wounds our fathers created." His hand rose to cup her cheek, thumb tracing the sharp line of her cheekbone. I'm asking you to trust the wolf you saved all those years ago." The morning mist clung to the forest floor as Lyra made her way through the familiar paths of her territory. 3 days had passed since Kale's revelation, and sleep had become a stranger to her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, the way it had transformed from vulnerable honesty to cold determination when she'd ordered him to leave. Her wolf stirred restlessly beneath her skin, yearning to shift and run until her paws bled and her lungs burned. But even in wolf form, she couldn't outrun the truth that gnawed at her chest like a festering wound. The sound of approaching footsteps made her pause. Marcus emerged from behind a cluster of pine trees, his expression grim. As her beta and oldest friend, he'd been watching her carefully since Kyle's departure. Though he'd mercifully refrained from asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. "The council is growing impatient," he said without preamble. "They want answers about the rogue who was in our territory. Some are calling for a hunting party." Lyra's jaw clenched. "There will be no hunting party." "Then you need to give them something else. They're starting to whisper, Lyra, about your judgment, about whether your emotions are compromising your leadership." The words hit their mark, and Lyra felt her control slip for just a moment. Power rippled through the air around her, making the nearby trees creak and sway despite the still morning. Marcus stepped back instinctively, his head tilting in submission. "My apologies, Alpha," he said quietly, "but you know I speak the truth." She did know. The weight of leadership had never felt heavier than it did now, pressing down on her shoulders like a mountain. For 50 years she'd ruled with unwavering strength, never allowing personal feelings to cloud her judgment. Now, because of one wolf, one impossible, infuriating wolf, everything was unraveling. "I'll address the council tonight," she said finally. Marcus nodded, but didn't leave. His brown eyes studied her face with the familiarity of someone who'd known her since before she'd claimed the throne. "He's still out there, isn't he? Close enough that you can sense him?" Lyra's throat tightened. She had been trying not to acknowledge the faint pull she felt at the edges of her consciousness, that thread of connection that shouldn't exist but did. Kyle hadn't left her territory entirely. He was lingering somewhere just beyond her borders, close enough that her alpha senses could barely detect his presence. "It doesn't matter," she said, though the words tasted like ash. "Doesn't it?" Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I've never seen you like this, Lyra. Not even when—" "Don't." The command cracked through the air like a whip. She wouldn't let him finish that sentence, wouldn't let him dredge up memories of the last time her heart had been torn between duty and desire. That path led only to pain and loss. Marcus fell silent, but his expression remained troubled. They stood in the growing daylight, two old friends separated by the vast chasm of rank and responsibility, until the sound of approaching wolves made them both turn. Elena burst through the tree line, her red hair wild and her green eyes wide with urgency. Behind her came 2 of the younger pack members, both breathing hard from their run. "Alpha," Elena gasped, struggling to catch her breath. "We found something. At the eastern border." The hairs on the back of Lyra's neck rose. "What kind of something?" "Bodies," one of the younger wolves said, his voice shaking slightly. 3 of them, rogues by their scent. But they've been torn apart. Lyra exchanged a sharp look with Marcus. Rogue deaths weren't uncommon. They often fought among themselves or fell victim to human hunters. But something in Elena's expression suggested this was different. "Show me," Lyra commanded. They ran through the forest in human form, their enhanced speed carrying them swiftly toward the eastern border. As they drew closer, the metallic scent of blood grew stronger, mixed with something else, something that made Lyra's wolf recoil in instinctive fear. The clearing where the bodies lay was a scene of absolute carnage. 3 wolves, all in human form, were scattered across the grass like broken dolls. But it was the way they'd been killed that made Lyra's blood run cold. Their chests had been torn open with surgical precision, and their hearts were missing. "This isn't the work of an animal," Marcus said grimly, crouching beside one of the bodies, "or even a typical rogue attack." Lyra knelt beside him, her mind racing. She'd seen violence like this before, decades ago, when dark magic had nearly torn the supernatural world apart. The memory made her stomach churn. Elena appeared at her shoulder, holding something small and dark. "Alpha, we found this clutched in that one's hand." Lyra took the object, and her world tilted. It was a scale, midnight black and pulsing with residual magic. Dragon magic. Her eyes snapped up to meet Marcus's horrified gaze. They both understood the implications immediately. Dragons had been extinct for over a century, wiped out in the Great War that had reshaped their world, unless they hadn't been extinct at all. The ancient oak's bark pressed rough against Lyra's back as she leaned into its massive trunk, watching Kyle pace before her like a caged predator. 3 days had passed since his revelation, and the weight of his secret sat between them like a physical presence. The morning mist clung to the forest floor, creating an ethereal backdrop for what felt like another confrontation brewing. "You can't keep avoiding the council forever," Kyle said, his voice carrying that edge she'd grown too familiar with lately. "Thane's been asking questions about why you've been disappearing." Lyra's fingers traced the intricate patterns carved into the tree, ancient symbols her grandmother had shown her as a child, marking this place as sacred ground where no blood could be spilled. How ironic that she'd chosen it as their meeting place, when violence seemed to simmer just beneath the surface of every conversation now. "Let him ask," she replied, though her stomach knotted at the thought of Thane's suspicious glances. "I'm still Alpha. I don't answer to my council about every hour of my day." "Don't you?" Kyle stopped pacing, fixing her with those unsettling golden eyes. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you're hiding from them, from your responsibilities, from the truth." The accusation hit like a physical blow. Lyra pushed off from the tree, her own wolf rising to meet the challenge in his tone. "Careful, Kale, you're walking a dangerous line." "Am I?" He stepped closer, and she caught the wild scent of him. Pine and storm clouds and something indefinably feral that made her pulse quicken. Or am I the only one brave enough to say what we're both thinking? And what exactly are we both thinking? That this, he gestured between them, changes everything. That every moment you spend with me instead of preparing your pack for war is a moment you're choosing me over them. The words hung in the air like an accusation, and Lyra felt the truth of them settle in her chest like a stone. Because he was right. Every stolen hour in this grove, every conversation that stretched longer than necessary, every time she found herself anticipating his arrival, she was choosing him. "You think I don't know the cost?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the morning breeze. "You think I haven't counted every compromise, every risk I'm taking by not turning you over to the council?" Kyle's expression softened, and for a moment she glimpsed the boy she'd saved all those years ago, vulnerable and desperate for acceptance. Then why? Why protect me when it would be easier to let them tear me apart? The question she'd been avoiding for days hung between them, demanding an answer she wasn't sure she was ready to give. Because the truth was complicated, messy, dangerous, in ways that went beyond pack politics or ancient grudges. "Because," she began, then stopped, frustrated by her own inability to articulate the tangle of emotions Kyle inspired. "Because you were mine to protect long before you were theirs to fear." Something shifted in his expression, surprise perhaps, or something deeper. "Yours?" The possessive word had slipped out without her permission, but now that it hung between them, Lyra found she couldn't take it back. Didn't want to. "I saved your life. That creates a bond, whether we acknowledge it or not." "A bond." He repeated the words slowly, as if testing their weight. "Is that what you call this? This thing that makes you seek me out every morning, that has you fighting your own instincts to keep me close?" Heat rose in her cheeks, but she held his gaze. "What would you call it?" Instead of answering, Kyle closed the distance between them in 2 swift steps. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with a gentleness that belied his predatory nature. "I'd call it dangerous, reckless, The kind of thing that starts wars and ends kingdoms. Then we agree on something, she breathed, even as she leaned into his touch. We agree on more than you think. His voice had dropped to barely a whisper, and she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. We agree that this is madness. We agree that it puts everything you've built at risk. We agree that it would be easier if I simply disappeared. But the word escaped her lips without permission, and she saw the corner of his mouth lift in something that wasn't quite a smile. But I find I'm not as noble as I thought, because even knowing the cost, even understanding what my presence here could destroy, I can't make myself leave. His confession hung between them like a bridge neither could cross safely, and Lyra felt the last of her carefully constructed defenses crumble. Whatever came next, whatever consequences awaited them both, she was done pretending that duty was stronger than the pull she felt toward this dangerous, impossible man who'd once been a frightened pup in need of saving. The ancient oak's roots seemed to pulse beneath Lyra's feet as she stood face to face with the wolf who had haunted her dreams for weeks. Moonlight filtered through the canopy above, casting shifting shadows across Kieran's human form. His transformation back had been seamless, graceful in a way that spoke of centuries of practice, yet something about his posture remained guarded, almost predatory. "You've grown strong," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt inadequate, insufficient to bridge the chasm of years between the injured pup she'd once cradled and the formidable male standing before her now. Kieran's dark eyes never left hers. Strength was a necessity, not a choice. His voice carried an edge she didn't remember, rough like gravel over silk. "You should have let me die that night, Lyra." The use of her name without title sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. She stepped closer, noting how his muscles tensed despite his apparent calm. "Is that truly what you believe? Look around you." He gestured to the clearing where patches of frost clung to the grass despite the warm autumn air. Where his bare feet had touched the earth, the ground bore scorch marks that gleamed silver in the moonlight. "This is what your mercy created." Lyra's breath caught. She'd sensed something different about him from their first encounter, but seeing the evidence of his power laid bare sent both fear and fascination coursing through her veins. "You're a frostfire wolf." The words hung between them like a death sentence. Frostfire wolves were legend, their bloodline supposedly extinct for over 3 centuries. They were beings of dual nature, capable of wielding both ice and flame with devastating precision. The last known frostfire had nearly destroyed half the continent before the combined packs managed to bring him down. "Now you understand." Kieran's smile held no warmth. "The pup you saved carries the blood of the most feared wolves in history. Every day I grow stronger, and every day the risk increases that I'll lose control completely. That's why you stayed away." Understanding dawned like a cold sunrise. All these years you've been hiding. Hiding, training, learning to contain what shouldn't exist. He ran a hand through his dark hair, and she caught a glimpse of vulnerability beneath his hardened exterior. "I've spent decades in the far northern territories, among the ice wolves who taught me discipline. But even they feared what I might become." Lyra moved closer still, drawn by an invisible thread she couldn't name. "And yet you came back." "I had to." The words seemed torn from him. "When I heard rumors that someone was challenging your authority, threatening your pack." He trailed off, jaw clenched. "You came back for me." It wasn't a question. "I came back because I owe you a debt." But his eyes told a different story, one that made her heart race despite every logical reason for caution. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of pine and something else, something wild and electric that seemed to emanate from Kieran himself. Lyra found herself close enough now to see the faint silver flecks in his dark irises, the way his breathing had grown shallow. "Your pack council suspects something," he said, his voice rougher than before. "They know you're hiding things from them. How long before they demand answers you can't give?" "Let me worry about my council." She reached out slowly, telegraphing her movement, and placed her hand flat against his chest. His skin was warm, almost fevered, and she could feel his heart pounding beneath her palm. "Right now, I'm more concerned about you. You should be afraid of me, not concerned." But he didn't step away from her touch. "Should I?" She looked up at him, studying the sharp angles of his face, the way the moonlight caught the silver in his hair. "The pup I saved had such gentle eyes. I see those same eyes now, even if you're trying to hide them behind all that carefully constructed danger." Lyra. Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer and a warning combined. "I've ruled this territory for over a century, Kieran. I've faced down rogue alphas, territorial disputes, and challenges to my authority that would have broken lesser wolves. Do you really think I'd be standing here if I believed you were truly dangerous to me?" Something shifted in his expression, the carefully maintained mask slipping just enough for her to glimpse the man beneath the monster he believed himself to be. "You don't understand what I'm capable of." "Then show me." The words left her lips before she could stop them, bold and reckless in a way that would have scandalized her counsel. But standing here in the moonlight with the wolf who'd captured her thoughts and haunted her dreams, Lyra found she was tired of caution, tired of the careful distance she maintained from everyone in her life. Kieran's eyes flashed silver, and for a moment she could swear she saw flames dancing in their depths. The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of the council chamber like ghostly fingers, unwilling to release their hold on the secrets contained within. Lyra stood before the massive oak table where 5 pairs of eyes watched her every movement, their expressions ranging from barely concealed hostility to grudging respect. The emergency session she'd called had drawn the most powerful alphas from across the northern territories, and the air crackled with barely restrained dominance. "You're asking us to trust a rogue," Alpha Matthias growled, his scarred hands flat against the polished wood. "A wolf whose very existence threatens the natural order we've maintained for centuries." Lyra's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm asking you to see reason. Kyle isn't the threat here. The Shadowkin are. They're massing at our borders while we waste time debating bloodlines and ancient prejudices." Alpha Elena, her silver hair gleaming in the filtered sunlight, leaned forward with predatory grace. "Ancient prejudices? Is that what you call the laws that have kept our pack stable for generations? The laws that prevent rogues from claiming territory that isn't theirs to take?" The words hit their mark, and Lyra felt heat rise in her chest. Every wolf in this room knew the implications of what she was defending. By standing with Kyle, she was essentially legitimizing a claim that could upend everything they understood about pack hierarchy and territorial rights. "The laws were written in different times," Lyra said, her alpha voice carrying undertones that made several of the assembled wolves shift uncomfortably. "Before we understood what we're truly facing." Through the tall windows, she could see Kyle waiting in the courtyard below, his dark form motionless despite the hostile stares of her guards. He'd insisted on being present for the council's decision, even knowing that his mere presence would inflame tensions. His courage in the face of almost certain rejection made something fierce and protective surge through her bond. Alpha Marcus, youngest of the council members, spoke up. "Even if we accept your assessment of this, Kyle's abilities, what makes you think the other packs will follow a rogue into battle? Half of them are already questioning your judgment for harboring him." The accusation hung in the air like smoke, and Lyra felt the familiar weight of crown and responsibility settle heavier on her shoulders. She'd known this moment would come, when her personal feelings would be weighed against her duty as Alpha King. But seeing Kyle fight beside her warriors, witnessing the raw power and tactical brilliance he brought to their defense, had only strengthened her resolve. "They'll follow strength," she said simply, "and Kyle is stronger than any wolf I've encountered in 3 decades of rule." An uncomfortable silence fell over the chamber. Alpha Elena's eyes narrowed to silver slits. "Stronger than you, Lyra?" The question was a trap, designed to make her appear weak or force her into a challenge she couldn't win politically. Admitting Kyle's superior strength would undermine her authority, but lying would only confirm their suspicions that her judgment was compromised by emotions they couldn't understand. Before she could answer, the chamber doors burst open. Marcus, her head scout, strode in without ceremony, his face grim with urgency. "Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but you need to see this." He placed a bloodied piece of fabric on the table, the torn remains of a patrol uniform bearing the insignia of the Eastern Territories. "We found 3 of Alpha Garrett's border guards an hour ago, or what was left of them." The room erupted in angry voices, but Lyra's focus zeroed in on the dark stains that weren't quite blood, the shadowy residue that clung to the fabric like a living thing, pulsing with malevolent energy even in death. "How far?" she asked, cutting through the chaos. 15 miles east. The attack happened sometime before dawn, but that's not the worst of it. Marcus's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "They left a message carved into the trees. The king's pet won't save you." Ice flooded Lyra's veins. The Shadowkin knew about Kael, knew about his connection to her, which meant their enemies were closer than anyone had realized and far better informed than should have been possible. Alpha Matthias slammed his fist on the table. "This is what comes of harboring strays. They've targeted us because of your rogue." "No," Lyra said, her voice cutting through his rage like a blade. "They've targeted us because we're the only thing standing between them and complete dominance of the Northern Territories, and right now Kael is our best hope of stopping them." She looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. "The Shadowkin have made their move. We can either stand together and fight with every advantage we possess, or we can cling to old prejudices and face extinction separately." The choice lay before them, stark and unforgiving as winter stone. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, and somewhere in the distance, darkness pressed closer with each passing moment. The ancient stones of the council chamber seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy as Lyra faced the assembled alphas. Their eyes gleamed in the flickering torchlight, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed hostility. She could feel their collective power pressing against her like a physical weight, testing her resolve. "You speak of prophecies and ancient bloodlines," Alpha Theron of the Eastern Territories growled, his scarred muzzle twisted in skepticism. "Yet you offer us no proof beyond your word." Lyra's fingers tightened around the obsidian pendant at her throat, the same one her grandmother had worn, passed down through generations of Alpha Queens. "I offer you survival, Theron. Nothing more, nothing less." Behind her, she sensed Kael's tension radiating like heat from a forge. He stood in the shadows as she'd instructed, but she knew every instinct screamed at him to step forward, to defend her against the verbal assault. His restraint both impressed and worried her. The power she'd witnessed him unleash days ago still hummed beneath his skin, barely contained. "The Alpha King asks us to trust blindly," Alpha Vera said, her voice silk over steel. "To abandon territories our packs have held for centuries, all for a threat that exists only in dusty prophecies. The threat is real." The words escaped Lyra's lips before she could stop them, carrying more desperation than she'd intended to reveal. "I've seen what's coming, the shadows that devour everything in their path, the way the very earth screams when they pass. Visions can be deceiving, young queen." The eldest among them, Alpha Magnus, spoke with the weight of centuries. His white fur gleamed like moonlight, and his ancient eyes held knowledge that made Lyra's skin crawl. "I've lived through 7 prophecies of doom. This realm still stands. This is different." Kael's voice cut through the chamber like a blade, and every head turned toward him. Lyra's heart hammered as he stepped from the shadows, his presence immediately dominating the space. "The old protections are failing. The barriers between worlds grow thin." The temperature in the chamber dropped perceptibly. Several alphas shifted, their wolves recognizing something primal and dangerous in Kael's aura. "And who are you to speak of such things?" Theron snarled, rising to his feet. "You reek of wild magic and secrets." Kael's eyes flashed, and for a terrifying moment, Lyra thought he might reveal everything. The silver fire that lived in his veins, the true nature of his heritage, the power that could reshape their world or destroy it. "I am someone who has walked between worlds," he said carefully. "Someone who has seen what waits in the darkness beyond our borders." "Convenient," Vera murmured. "A mysterious stranger appears just as our Alpha King speaks of ancient threats." How theatrical. Lyra stepped forward, placing herself between Kael and the increasingly agitated council. "Enough. You want proof? Look around you. The prey animals flee southward in unprecedented numbers. The northern forests grow silent and cold. Even your own scouts report strange disturbances along the borderlands. Natural phenomena, Magnus dismissed. Climate shifts, nothing more." "Then explain this." Lyra pulled a crystal vial from her robes, its contents swirling with an oily black substance that seemed to absorb light. "This was taken from a water source 3 days north of here. Every living thing that touched it died within hours." The chamber fell silent. The black substance writhed against the glass as if alive, and several alphas unconsciously stepped back. "What is it?" Theron whispered. "A herald," Kael said grimly. "The corruption spreads before the true darkness arrives. Soon it will reach the major waterways, then the heartlands of your territories." Vera's composure cracked. "How long do we have?" Lyra met her gaze steadily. "Weeks, perhaps less." The weight of that revelation settled over the council like a shroud. She watched as denial warred with dawning understanding in their expressions. These were not weak leaders. They had survived countless challenges to reach their positions. But this was beyond anything they'd faced before. "What do you propose?" Magnus asked finally, his ancient voice heavy with resignation. "Unity," Lyra said simply. "Pool our resources, combine our territory's defenses, create safe zones for the civilian populations while our warriors prepare for what's coming. And if we refuse?" Theron's question carried no real defiance now, only exhaustion. Lyra felt Kael's presence at her back, steady and reassuring. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Then we all fall separately, and everything our ancestors built dies with us. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Outside the chamber, she could hear the distant howls of scouts returning with reports, the everyday sounds of a pack going about its business, unaware that their world balanced on a knife's edge. Finally, Magnus nodded slowly. "Tell us what you need, Alpha King. The northern territories stand with you." One by one, the others followed suit, their voices joining in reluctant but determined agreement. As their words echoed through the ancient chamber, Lyra allowed herself one moment of fierce hope. They had a chance. The ancient stone chamber beneath the palace held secrets that predated even Lyra's reign. As she descended the spiraling steps, torchlight flickering against weathered walls, she could feel the weight of centuries pressing down upon her shoulders. Kael followed silently, his presence both comforting and unsettling in the confined space. "The chronicles of the first bonds," Lyra murmured, running her fingers along the carved inscriptions that lined the walls. "My predecessor showed me these texts once, warning me they contained knowledge too dangerous to share." Kael's voice echoed softly behind her. "What kind of knowledge?" She paused before an ornate door, its surface adorned with symbols that seemed to shift in the dancing torchlight. The truth about hybrid wolves, about what happens when two royal bloodlines merge. Her hand trembled slightly as she pressed against the door, feeling the ancient magic respond to her touch. "About what you truly are." The door swung open with a grinding sound that spoke of decades without use. Inside, shelves carved directly into the stone held scrolls and bound volumes, their leather covers worn smooth by age. Lyra moved with purpose to a particular section, retrieving a tome bound in midnight blue leather. "The prophecy of the twin flames," she read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "When shadow meets light, when lost returns to found, the ancient power shall awaken and kingdoms shall tremble." Kael moved closer, his warmth radiating against her back as he peered over her shoulder at the archaic script. "This is about us?" Lyra nodded, turning pages with reverent care. Your father wasn't just any alpha, Kyle. He was the heir to the northern kingdoms, the last of the Shadowborn line. When our bloodlines joined through you—" She paused, finding the passage she sought. "Here. The child born of both flame and shadow shall possess the power to unite the realms or see them burn." The weight of revelation settled between them like a living thing. Kyle stepped back, running his hands through his dark hair, his usual composure finally cracking. "That's why they tried to kill me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not because I was illegitimate, but because they feared what I might become. What we might become together," Lyra corrected, closing the tome carefully. "The prophecy speaks of a bond deeper than mere mating, a joining of powers that hasn't been seen for over 1,000 years." Outside the chamber, footsteps echoed on the stone stairs. Rapid, urgent, Marcus appeared in the doorway, his face flushed from running. "My queen," he gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "The council has called an emergency session. They're demanding to see you immediately." Lyra exchanged a sharp look with Kyle. "What's happened?" "Word has spread about Kyle's parentage. Someone leaked the information about his father's true identity." Marcus's expression grew grave. "There are calls for his immediate execution as a threat to the realm." The ancient prophecy suddenly felt less like destiny and more like a death sentence. Lyra's protective instincts flared, her wolf rising to the surface with barely contained fury. "They wouldn't dare," she growled, but even as she spoke, she knew they would. Fear made people do terrible things, and the council had always been quick to eliminate what they couldn't control. Kyle placed a steadying hand on her arm. "We knew this day would come. The question is whether we face it together or if you distance yourself to protect your throne." The choice hung between them, weighted with all the history they shared and all the futures they might never see. Lyra looked at this man who had started as a pup she couldn't abandon and had grown into someone she couldn't live without. "Together," she said firmly, surprising no one more than herself with the conviction in her voice. "If they want to invoke ancient laws, then they'll learn about ancient powers." Marcus looked between them, understanding dawning in his eyes. "My queen, what are you planning?" "The bonding rite," Lyra replied, her decision crystallizing even as she spoke. "If Kyle and I complete the ancient joining described in the prophecy, they won't be able to touch him without declaring war on the very foundations of our laws." "That ritual hasn't been performed in centuries," Marcus warned. "The magic involved, it could kill you both if something goes wrong." Kyle's grip on her arm tightened. "Lyra, I won't let you risk everything for me." She turned to face him fully, her amber eyes blazing with determination. "This isn't just about you anymore. It's about what we could build together, what we could become. The realm needs change, and perhaps this is how we achieve it." The sound of more footsteps on the stairs reached them, heavier, more numerous. The council's guards, no doubt. "We're out of time," Lyra said, grabbing the prophecy tome and several others. "Marcus, is the old ritual chamber still intact?" "Yes, but—" "Then that's where we're going, tonight." The ancient stone chamber beneath the palace trembled as Lyra pressed her palm against the elder's seal, her wolf form shimmering back to human shape. The mystical barrier that had protected the kingdom's most guarded secrets for centuries began to dissolve, revealing scrolls and artifacts that hadn't seen light in generations. Kyle stood beside her, his breathing shallow as the weight of what they were about to uncover settled between them. "Are you certain about this?" His voice carried the strain of their recent battle against the Shadow Pack's advance forces. Blood still stained his shirt from wounds that were healing slower than usual, a side effect of the dark magic that had been unleashed across their territory. Lyra's fingers traced the ancient symbols carved into the stone walls. "The answers we need are here. The connection between your bloodline and mine, the reason the Shadow Pack wants you so desperately, it's all connected to something our predecessors buried long ago." The first scroll crumbled slightly as she unfurled it, the aged parchment revealing text written in the old tongue. As an Alpha King, Lyra could read the archaic script, though some passages remained frustratingly unclear. What she could decipher made her blood run cold. "The convergence prophecy," she whispered, her eyes scanning the elaborate text. "When the lost heir of shadows returns to the realm of light, two bloodlines shall merge, or the realm shall fall to eternal darkness." Kyle moved closer, his presence both comforting and electric against her side. "Lost heir of shadows? What does that mean?" Lyra's hands shook as she continued reading. The scroll detailed a catastrophic war between two ancient wolf kingdoms, one that ruled through light and protection, another that wielded shadow magic for conquest. The Shadow Realm had been banished, its royal lines scattered and presumed extinct, but not extinct, hidden. "Your mother," Lyra breathed, pieces falling into place with devastating clarity. She wasn't just a rogue wolf seeking sanctuary, she was fleeing because she carried the last of the shadow bloodline. The revelation hit Kyle like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his wolf stirring restlessly beneath his skin. "That's impossible. I would have known. I would have felt that kind of power. Not if it was intentionally suppressed." Lyra reached for another scroll, this one detailing binding rituals used to contain dangerous magical inheritances. "Look at this. A ceremony to lock away shadow abilities until triggered by extreme emotional trauma or proximity to other ancient bloodlines." The chamber fell silent except for the distant sounds of their pack, preparing for the next wave of attacks. The shadow pack had been relentless, pressing closer to the palace with each assault. Now Lyra understood why they wanted Kyle alive, rather than simply eliminating him as a threat. "They need me to reclaim the Shadow Throne," Kyle realized, his voice hollow. "That's why Morrigan keeps calling me home, why she's willing to tear apart your kingdom to get to me." Lyra set down the scroll and turned to face him fully. In the dim light of the chamber, she could see the fear and confusion warring in his expression. This was the man she'd fallen in love with, the same gentle soul who'd been that terrified pup seeking shelter decades ago. But he was also something far more dangerous than either of them had imagined. "There's more," she said softly, dreading what came next but knowing they needed the complete truth. "The prophecy speaks of a choice. The shadow heir can either reclaim their dark inheritance and rule over a realm of eternal night, or they can willingly bind their power to the light throne, creating a new form of magic that could protect both realms." "Bind my power to yours," Kyle said, understanding immediately. "A permanent magical bond." The implications hung heavy between them. Such a bond would be irreversible, tying their life forces together completely. If one died, the other would follow. More than that, it would require absolute trust and love, emotions that couldn't be faked or forced. "We don't have to decide now," Lyra started. But Kyle cut her off. "Yes, we do." His eyes met hers with startling intensity. "Morrigan's forces will reach the palace by dawn. If I don't make a choice, the decision gets made for us when she drags me back to claim the Shadow Throne." Above them, a horn sounded, 3 long blasts that signaled incoming enemies. The final battle was beginning earlier than expected. Kyle stepped closer, his hand cupping Lyra's face with infinite gentleness. "I've been running from my past my entire life, but I won't run from this, from us." "The binding ritual is complex," Lyra warned, even as her heart soared at his words. "And if we fail?" "We won't fail." His thumb traced her cheekbone, and she felt the certainty in his touch. "You saved me once when I was just a frightened pup. Let me save our future now." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the stone corridors. Their time for preparation was over. The ancient stone chamber beneath the palace trembled as power surged through the air like lightning seeking ground. Lyra pressed her back against the cold wall, watching in horrified fascination as Kyle's body convulsed with transformative energy. This wasn't the gentle shift between human and wolf she knew. This was something primordial, violent, and utterly terrifying. His screams echoed off the vaulted ceiling, a sound that seemed to split her very soul. The magical restraints she'd placed around the chamber sparked and hissed, barely containing the force radiating from him. She could feel her own wolf cowering deep within her mind. recognizing something far older and more dangerous than any alpha power she'd ever encountered. "Kale," she whispered, though she knew he couldn't hear her over the roar of whatever ancient magic was claiming him. The pup she'd saved, the man she'd come to love, was disappearing before her eyes. His form stretched and expanded, muscles rippling beneath skin that seemed to glow with an inner fire. When his eyes snapped open, they blazed like twin suns, not the warm gold she remembered, but something fierce and alien. The wolf that emerged was massive, easily twice the size of any alpha she'd known, with fur that seemed to absorb and reflect light simultaneously. But it was the voice that spoke in her mind that made her blood run cold. Finally it rumbled, ancient and amused. "Do you know how long I've waited to stretch these borrowed limbs, little alpha? You're not Kael." The words escaped her throat as barely more than a breath. The enormous wolf turned its burning gaze upon her, and she felt the weight of eons in that stare. "I am and I am not. We are complicated, he and I. But how delicious that you should be here to witness this moment, Lyra Blackthorn." The last true alpha, standing in the presence of the first, understanding crashed over her like a tidal wave. "You're the progenitor," such a clinical term for the father of all werewolves. The creature that wore Kael's face padded closer, each step sending tremors through the stone floor. "I prefer to think of myself as displaced, cast out by ungrateful children who feared their creator's power. The legends said you were destroyed." Lyra forced herself to stand straight, drawing upon every ounce of alpha authority she possessed. It felt pathetically inadequate against this ancient presence. "Destroyed? No, dear child. Merely relocated, bound into a bloodline passed down through generations, waiting for the right vessel." Those terrible eyes fixed on her with predatory interest. "Your little rescue mission 30 years ago was quite fortuitous. The boy was dying, his defenses weakened. It made the bonding so much easier." Horror clawed at her chest. "You've been inside him all this time?" "Sleeping, mostly, dreaming of freedom while he lived his small, mortal life. But every strong emotion, every use of power, fed me strength. His feelings for you have been particularly nourishing. Let him go." The command rang through the chamber, backed by all her authority as Alpha King. The progenitor's laughter was like breaking glass. "You still don't understand. There is no separation between us now. His memories are mine, his feelings, his love for you." The massive head tilted, studying her. "Such devotion is rare. Even among my children, few have loved with such consuming intensity." Lyra felt tears burning her eyes. "If you have his memories, then you know he'd never forgive you for using them against me. Forgiveness assumes he has a choice in the matter." But something flickered in those blazing eyes, a moment of uncertainty, of conflict. The wolf's massive form wavered slightly, as if two forces were struggling for control. When the voice spoke again, it carried a different tone. Younger, desperate, achingly familiar. "Lyra, run." "Kael!" She lunged forward, but the ancient presence reasserted itself, snarling. "Foolish boy, you cannot resist what you are." But the crack in its control gave Lyra hope. She reached out with her power, not to dominate, but to connect, the way she had with the dying pup all those years ago. Past the alien presence, past the overwhelming force of the progenitor's will, she found something familiar, a warmth she recognized, a spirit that had never truly been conquered. "Clever," the progenitor observed, but there was wariness in its mental voice now. "You seek to wake what I have claimed, but he chose this, little alpha. To save you, he accepted me fully." Lies. But even as she spoke, she could feel the truth of it in the connection between them. Kael's sacrifice, his willingness to embrace the very thing he'd fought against his entire life, all to protect her. "Now you begin to understand. He is mine by choice, strengthened by love, bound by sacrifice, the perfect vessel for my return." The wolf's form began to shift again, growing larger still, and through him, I will reclaim what was stolen from me, starting with your pretty little kingdom." The chamber walls cracked under the pressure of unleashed power, and Lyra realized that whatever happened next would determine not just her fate, but the survival of every werewolf under her protection. The ancient stone chamber beneath the palace trembled as Lyra's power collided with the dark magic that had been festering there for decades. Shadows writhed along the walls like living things, and the air crackled with energy so intense it made her teeth ache. Kael stood beside her, his own wolf spirit blazing silver-white as they faced the source of the corruption that had been slowly poisoning her kingdom. At the chamber's heart sat a crystalline formation, pulsing with malevolent red light. Within its depths she could see the twisted remnants of her predecessor's final spell, the one that had bound the shadow wolves to serve the crown, the one that had created the very curse now threatening to tear everything apart. "The binding stone," Kael breathed, his voice tight with recognition. "My pack wasn't the first, was it?" Lyra's jaw clenched as memories she'd tried to bury surfaced. "No. King Aldrich enslaved dozens of packs before yours. I thought I'd destroyed all traces when I took the throne, but this—" She gestured at the pulsing crystal. This was hidden too well. The stone's light flared brighter, and suddenly the chamber filled with ghostly forms, the spirits of wolves who had died under the binding curse, their eyes hollow with decades of torment. They moved toward Lyra and Kael with jerky, unnatural motions, their spectral fangs bared. "They're trapped," Kael said, his hand finding hers. "All these years, they've been trapped in agony." One spirit broke away from the others, and Lyra's heart clenched as she recognized the silver-marked female who approached. "Kael's mother," she whispered. The ghostly wolf's eyes held no recognition, only endless pain and a hunger for release. The binding stone pulsed again, and Lyra felt its pull trying to reassert control over Kael. His grip on her hand tightened as he fought against the compulsion, his body trembling with the effort. The curse mark on his shoulder blazed to life, and she could see the internal war playing out across his features. "Fight it," she urged, pouring her own power through their connection. "You're stronger than this magic. You always have been." But the stone's influence was growing stronger, feeding off the assembled spirits and the proximity to its original target. Kael's eyes flickered between his natural blue and the sickly red of the curse. When he spoke, his voice was strained. "Lyra, if I can't break free, you will." She stepped closer to the stone, feeling its malevolent energy wash over her like acid. "We both will, together." The ghostly wolves circled them now, their movements becoming more aggressive. But as Lyra watched, she noticed something the original cursemaker had missed. The spirits weren't just bound to serve, they were bound to protect the stone, which meant if she could find a way to redirect their purpose. "Kael, listen to me," she said urgently. "Your mother's spirit, all of them, they're not our enemies, they're prisoners. If we can show them a way to break free—" Understanding dawned in his eyes. "They'll help us destroy the thing that's been tormenting them." Lyra nodded and released his hand, stepping toward the circle of spirits. The ghostly wolves tensed, but she made no aggressive moves. Instead, she lowered herself to one knee and bowed her head. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice carrying across the chamber. "I'm sorry I didn't find you sooner. I'm sorry you've suffered for so long because of my predecessor's cruelty." The spirits paused, confusion rippling through their ranks. Kael's mother approached slowly, her ghostly form flickering. "But I'm here now," Lyra continued, lifting her head to meet the spirit's hollow gaze. "And I can offer you what you've been denied all these years. Rest, peace, freedom." She raised her hands, and golden light began to emanate from her palms. Not the harsh, controlling magic of the binding spell, but something warm and healing. "Help us destroy this stone, and I swear by my crown and my life that I will set you free." The ghostly wolf that had been Kael's mother stepped forward, and for just a moment her eyes cleared. She looked at her son with recognition and love, then turned to the binding stone with ancient fury. A howl rose from her spectral throat, not the tortured sound they'd been making, but a true wolf's call to battle. The other spirits took up the cry, their forms becoming more solid as they embraced this final chance for vengeance. The binding stone's light flickered as the very spirits it had been using to maintain its power turned against it. Cracks appeared in the crystal's surface, spreading like spider webs. Kyle moved to stand beside Lyra, his curse mark dimming as the stone's hold weakened. "Now," he said. Together, they channeled their combined power into a single focused strike. Gold and silver light spiraled around the chamber as their magic joined with the fury of the freed spirits. The binding stone's defenses crumbled under the assault, and with a sound like breaking glass, it finally shattered. The ancient ritual chamber beneath the palace hummed with an energy Lyra had never felt before. Crystalline formations jutting from the walls pulsed with an otherworldly light, responding to the convergence of bloodlines that hadn't been united in over 1,000 years. She stood at the center of the circular stone platform, her hands trembling as she watched Kyle approach from the opposite side. His wolf form was magnificent, silver fur rippling with shadows that seemed to move independently of his body, but it was his eyes that held her captive, those familiar amber depths now swirling with power that made the air itself bend around him. This was no ordinary alpha. This was something far more dangerous, far more precious than she had ever imagined. "The Shadowborn King," she whispered, the words barely audible over the thrumming energy. "I thought your bloodline was extinct." Kyle's massive head dipped in acknowledgement before he shifted, his transformation fluid and mesmerizing. When he stood before her in human form, naked and unashamed, ancient runes glowed along his skin like living tattoos. They pulsed in rhythm with the crystals surrounding them. "My grandmother hid me well," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated through the chamber. "She knew what would happen if the other packs learned what I was, what we could become together." Lyra's breath caught. The prophecies she dismissed as folklore suddenly crashed over her with devastating clarity. The Alpha King and the Shadowborn, united as one pack, would either save the wolf clans or destroy them utterly. There had never been a middle ground. "This is why you came back to me," she realized, pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed clicking into place. "Not just because I saved you as a pup, because our bloodlines are meant to—" "No." Kyle stepped closer, his hand reaching out to cup her cheek. The contact sent sparks of power racing through her entire body. "That's where you're wrong, Lyra. I came back because of what you showed me in that forest 30 years ago. Kindness when you could have killed, protection when you owed me nothing. Everything else, the prophecy, the power, the politics, that's just circumstance." The crystals around them flared brighter, responding to their proximity. Lyra could feel her own wolf rising, not in dominance or submission, but in recognition. This was her mate, her equal, her other half. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. "Marcus knows," she said, the weight of their situation pressing down on her. "He's been planning this for months. The challenge tomorrow, it's not just about leadership. He wants to execute you before we can complete the bonding. Let him try." Kyle's hand slipped down to rest against her throat, his thumb tracing the rapid pulse there. He doesn't understand what he's dealing with. None of them do. And what exactly are they dealing with? Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. She could feel her control slipping, the careful walls she'd built around her heart crumbling with each passing second. Instead of answering with words, Kyle leaned down and claimed her mouth with his. The kiss was electric, literally. Power arced between them, lighting up the chamber like a lightning storm. Lyra felt her wolf surge forward, merging with his in a way that transcended the physical. For a moment she could see through his eyes, feel his strength flowing through her veins, understand the crushing loneliness he'd carried for decades. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. The runes on Kyle's skin had spread, now covering his arms and chest in intricate patterns that seemed to map constellations she'd never seen. Her own body hummed with newfound power, her wolf stronger than it had ever been. "This is what they're dealing with," Kyle said, his forehead pressed against hers. a bond that makes us more than the sum of our parts. The Shadowborn were never meant to rule alone, Lyra. We were meant to share power, to balance it. That's why your ancestors hunted mine to near extinction. They were terrified of what unified strength could accomplish. The massive doors to the chamber burst open, and Marcus strode in flanked by 6 of his most loyal warriors. His face was a mask of fury and something else, fear. So it's true, the Shadowborn lives. Lyra stepped protectively in front of Kyle, her power radiating outward in waves that made Marcus's wolves whine and back away. You have no authority here, Marcus. These are the sacred chambers. Sacred to whom? Marcus snarled, but he didn't advance further. To the monsters who would see our pure bloodlines corrupted. I won't let you destroy everything our ancestors built. Kyle's laughter was dark, dangerous. Your ancestors built their power on the bones of my family. Tomorrow that debt comes due. The crystals around them pulsed once, brilliant and blinding, before plunging the chamber into absolute darkness. The ancient stones of the sacred grove hummed with power as Lyra and Kyle stood before the circle of alphas. Moonlight filtered through the canopy above, casting silver patterns across the weathered faces of the assembled leaders. Each alpha bore the weight of their pack's future in their eyes, and Lyra could feel the tension crackling through the air like lightning before a storm. You ask us to trust in bonds forged by an enemy, growled Alpha Thorn, his massive frame bristling with barely contained aggression. This male carries the blood of those who would see us all destroyed. Kyle stepped forward, his head held high despite the condemnation in every gaze. I carry their blood, yes, but I choose to spill it for you. The declaration sent murmurs rippling through the circle. Lyra's heart clenched as she watched him bare his soul to wolves who saw him as nothing more than a weapon pointed at their throats. She wanted to shield him from their judgment, but she knew this moment belonged to him alone. Pretty words, Alpha Vera snarled, her silver coat gleaming in the moonlight. But words won't stop the army marching toward our borders. Your father's forces will be here by dawn. Then we use that against them, Kyle replied, his voice steady as granite. They expect me to deliver Lyra broken and defeated. Instead, I'll deliver them into a trap. Elder Sage stepped forward from the shadows, her ancient eyes fixed on Kyle with an intensity that made the air shimmer. Show us, young one. Prove the strength of the bond that binds you to our Alpha Queen. Lyra felt a familiar tingle of magic beginning to build between them. Without hesitation, she reached for Kyle's hand, their fingers intertwining as naturally as roots seeking water. The moment their skin touched, power exploded through the grove. Golden light erupted from their joined hands, spiraling upward into the night sky. The light pulsed with their shared heartbeat, and Lyra gasped as she felt Kyle's soul merge completely with her own. Every emotion, every memory, every fierce protective instinct flowed between them like molten gold. The assembled alphas staggered backward as the wave of power washed over them. In that radiant light, they saw everything: Kyle's tortured childhood, his desperate escape, his years of searching for the she-wolf who had shown him kindness. They witnessed his anguish when he discovered who his father truly was, his horror at the blood on his hands, and his unwavering determination to protect Lyra at any cost. Impossible, breathed Alpha Thorn, his hostility crumbling into awe. A true mate bond hasn't manifested in over 2 centuries. The moon goddess works in mysterious ways, Elder Sage murmured, her weathered face soft with wonder. She has given our people a gift beyond measure. But Lyra barely heard them. She was drowning in the depths of Kyle's devotion, feeling the way he would gladly tear his own heart from his chest, if it meant keeping her safe. The bond between them pulsed with silver fire, stronger than blood, deeper than instinct. A howl pierced the night air, distant but growing closer. The enemy had arrived. Kyle's hand tightened on hers as the golden light began to fade. They're here. My father leads the front assault himself. Lyra turned to face the circle of alphas, her own power crackling through the air like thunder. You've seen the truth of our bond. Will you stand with us? One by one, the alphas stepped forward. Alpha Thorn was the first, his massive head bowing in acknowledgement. "We stand with you, Alpha Queen, to the end." The others followed, their voices joining in a chorus of loyalty that echoed through the sacred grove. Even those who had been most skeptical now looked upon Kyle with respect rather than suspicion. "What do you need from us?" asked Alpha Vera, her silver eyes gleaming with predatory anticipation. Lyra felt the battle plans crystallizing in her mind, guided by the tactical brilliance she could sense flowing from Kyle through their bond. "Kyle will return to his father's camp. He'll claim the spell worked, that I'm weakened and ready for capture. When they follow him back here, we'll be waiting," Alpha Thorn finished, his lips pulling back to reveal razor-sharp fangs. Kyle's jaw clenched. "This is our only chance. If my father suspects betrayal even for a moment—" "He won't," Lyra said firmly, cupping his face in her hands. "Because what he'll see is exactly what he expects, a son returning home victorious." Their foreheads touched, and Lyra felt the bond between them pulse with unbreakable strength. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The howls were getting closer now, echoing through the forest like the voices of the damned. War had come to the sacred grove, and with it the chance to finally break the chains of a blood-soaked past. Kyle pulled away reluctantly, his eyes burning with fierce determination. "Until we meet again, my Alpha Queen." Then he was gone, melting into the shadows to face his father one final time.